My guest today is Tin Dalida, Chief Operating Officer at Wovoka. Wovoka is focused on scaling the origination of blue carbon projects in Southeast Asia, starting in the Philippines. They focus on the conservation, restoration, and management of coastal ecosystems like mangroves, seagrass beds, and salt marshes, which have exceptional carbon sequestration capabilities. We discuss the importance of blue carbon projects not only from a carbon sequestration potential, but also the important support provided to local communities, as well as ecosystem benefits such as protecting essential fish nurseries, providing coastal resilience, and preserving biodiversity. Welcome to the Carbon Exposure Project. Tin, welcome to Singapore and welcome to the Carbon Exposure Project. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you as well. Happy to be here.
Well, I'm really excited for this conversation. In particular, the feedback that I received for season 1 of the podcast was really positive and overwhelmingly so, but the constant feedback was that we need to represent and provide a platform for a voice coming from the project development community. You've got the distinction of being essentially our first guest from that project development world. So welcome. It's sorely needed in terms of your perspective. And it hasn't been from a lack of trying. It's just a difficulty with regards to schedules, et cetera, and the reality of kind of, filming these episodes. But I'm really grateful that you were able to come to Singapore for this conversation in particular. And I really want to use this as an opportunity to showcase the type of work that you and your team at Wovoka are doing, because it's clearly necessary work and high impact. So firstly, cheers and welcome.
Cheers.
Cheers. So if you'll indulge me just to begin and kind of set the scene and some context for our audience, can you provide a little bit of background about your journey so far and how you've arrived at this stage in your career in terms of the project development and also just feature, if you can, the type of work that you and your team are doing at Wovoka?
Okay, so I'm an environmental scientist in the Philippines.
Yep.
With a particular passion in blue carbon. So in most of my career, I was involved in the academe sector doing research work, researching mangroves and seagrasses.
Okay.
And I assess their health. I assess just how much carbon there is in those ecosystems. So I did that for several years before I got curious with the carbon market and the concept of carbon credits, right? So I shifted my career towards the voluntary compliance carbon market first. I was there first involved with the Californian company that where we help generate credits for clients, paid credits also. So I was doing LCFS, if you're familiar, renewable energy certificates. And then now I'm currently fully involved with the voluntary carbon market with Wovoka. We are doing nature-based projects in the Philippines. And we are a climate tech startup that focuses on early project de-risking and due diligence support for climate investors. So we have a bunch of pipeline in the Philippines. We concentrate on terrestrial restoration, blue carbon restoration, and agroforestry so far.
So thanks for that. That's really interesting in terms of, there's a lot of interest in terms of the carbon sequestration component, certainly in nature-based solutions on the afforestation and reforestation in particular. And, blue carbon is essentially, let's say, the new kid on the block in the carbon market speak, but it's obviously been around for a long time. But can you give us a little bit of context around what blue carbon means and the role of mangroves really in not only sequestration potential for carbon, but the important biodiversity and also ecosystem roles that it plays?
So there are two types of carbon that we are usually hear of. First is the green carbon, so your terrestrial ecosystems. So the trees that you're seeing just outside of your city, it's terrestrial carbon. And then you have blue carbon, which is the carbon that is stored in the mangroves and seagrass ecosystems.
Correct.
So I think most people are being more aware of it because of its sequestration capacity. It's larger than terrestrial ecosystem. So
can you quantify that for us? Because I think that's an important point that's often missed. Because we're terrestrial beings as humans and we live on land, we often forget that 70+% of the world's surface is covered by water, right? In seas. And so that marine ecosystem has huge potential in terms of the sequestration, but can you give us some context?
Yes, exactly. For the Philippines, for example, where I'm from, we have we're in the top 5 longest coastlines in the world. So that means we have a lot of marine resources, we have a lot of wetlands, we have a lot of mangrove potential, right? So I think it makes sense for us to do this sort of project, nature-based projects, because we have a vast land for marine resources.
That's really important. And I think look, again, I'm going to nerd out here if you'll indulge me, but that's really interesting that you say that. So Philippines is in the top 5 of the longest coastlines in the world.
Yes.
I don't think many people would associate the Philippines, an archipelago country of all these islands, as having such a large coastline, but it's because of the surface area, right? And so that's really important, because oftentimes people think of these large continents as having these very large coastlines. It's not. There's an inverse correlation, quite frankly, with the surface area, certainly of islands. And so that's really interesting. Can you give me that context around that potential, the unmet potential and of the marine ecosystems in particular for blue carbon in the Philippines context?
Yeah, so aside from having that amount of coastlines in the Philippines, you also have, I think, Southeast Asia boasts of the largest mangrove area in the world.
Really?
I would say. The Philippines has more than 50% of the mangrove species in the world.
Really?
So that's very interesting, right? Yeah. And aside from that, it's also currently we have a high degradation rate in terms of mangroves and terrestrial ecosystems alike.
Okay. But mangroves play an important role not only in the sequestration potential, but also for broader ecosystem benefits that they bring, right?
Yes, for sure. So one purpose of mangroves, I would say, is it's a nursery. So fishes actually live there. The early stage fishes uses mangrove and seagrass habitats for nursery. So they grow up there before they transfer to coral reefs, right? And another would be protection from storm surges. So communities living nearby the coast can get protection from those mangroves.
That's a really important point again. And sorry to kind of keep relating on this, but I'm a massive fan, as you can tell. But the marine ecosystems and mangroves in particular play, like you said, that storm protection because of the diffuse nature of how mangroves grow, right? They effectively diffuse the noise signals that come from waves, wind, and noise, etc. And so they provide resiliency from a climate impact perspective, as well as we start to see higher, rising sea levels and more frequent storms. So that's a really important component, and that's, I think, analogous to, complementary to why carbon markets have a role to play here to help to stimulate the protection, but also the stimulation of more and more seedlings being planted to basically rehabilitate coastlines to have that blue carbon and the mangrove ecosystems restored. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so I would like to think that carbon sequestration capacity is just like a byproduct of all the other benefits mangroves give, right? So what we want to do first is actually plant mangroves for those communities, not necessarily just for carbon credit. It's like a byproduct. It's a bonus, right?
Oh, that's a nice way of doing it. Yeah, but look, obviously from a carbon finance perspective, many of those projects just wouldn't be underwritten financially if it wasn't for the financial stimulus that comes from the carbon component. So they're inextricably linked ultimately. But it's great to see that it's the causality, like it's the end product. But there's so many other benefits that come from that. Can we dive into the community component that you've kind of alluded to here, if you'll indulge me? Just like what are the impacts and benefits for local communities from protecting those mangrove systems?
Yeah, so one would be most of these communities are fishermen. So most of them depend on fish as their source of livelihood, as their source of food. So if we protect these mangroves, we ultimately protect their livelihoods, their sources of income. So it's really good that we do this type of protection activities for the people.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, look, when you look at the SDGs, there's the marine components as well. And so protecting those livelihoods is aligned with sustainable development. So that's fantastic. In terms of, can I bring it back to your journey? You mentioned you started out in academia and then you started to work in compliance carbon markets in California. You mentioned the low carbon fuel standard, LCFS, renewable energy certificates, and other environmental attributes that you were exposed to. What attracted you to carbon in particular? And then how then did you make that transition to, let's say now, a private sector entity and startup in the sort of the tech and carbon space?
That's a really good story that I like telling from time to time.
Yeah, please.
because for several years I was a researcher. I was really focused on the science. So I was always asking myself, like, why was I collecting samples? Why I was doing this hourless uh, hourless time in the laboratory, and what is it for all for, right? So I think that's how I found my way into carbon credits. Like, there must be a purpose in quantifying all these carbon. So
not just quantification for quantification's sake. There must be an end goal and an end purpose. Okay.
And I think I found my way through the carbon markets.
Okay, cool. And so what is that purpose in your view that you found?
Well, I guess it's really providing benefits to the community. When we do restoration projects, we do not only bring in ecological benefits for the community, we also bring that carbon financing into place. So that makes those projects actually fundable, makes the community have other sources of livelihoods coming from the carbon income.
It's really fascinating in terms of understanding your journey and obviously your mission. But can I ask you a very broad and maybe naive question, but why focus on nature-based solutions?
Yeah, so for one, I think why Wovoka and myself focuses on nature-based solutions is, first, out of all carbon dioxide removal solutions, nature-based is likely provides the clearest evidence of removal, right? So no one can argue that trees can capture carbon because it's a given. It's basic science. So that's one.
Photosynthesis, one.
Yes. And another one is, I guess, coming from the Philippines. So it makes the most sense for us to pursue nature-based solutions. And I mean that because Philippines is an archipelago. It's composing of 3 big islands, and we have a very long coastline. So we have vast natural resources there. And it's also seated in the center of marine shorefish biodiversity. So we have it's a biodiversity hotspot. And aside from that, there's also the threat of degradation. So, for example, from the 90s to 2005, the forest degradation loss was around 30%, more than 30%. So that primes us for being a country with high restoration potential. So that's why we're choosing nature-based solutions. And of course, it's also nice to have co-benefits, right? So we, by focusing on nature-based solutions, we also provide sources of livelihood for our communities. So we also we increase biodiversity, we increase sources of income, we provide alternative livelihood for these communities. So it's perfect.
So multifaceted, while protecting nature-based solutions and ecosystems. There's a community impacts. There's the economic benefits to those communities. There's ultimately resilience, also from a climate perspective as well. And like you said, scale is another really interesting component.
And comparing it also to tech-based removals, it's also better because it's low cost.
Yeah, look, it's always, like beauty, it's in the eye of the beholder. But I would agree with you in terms of scalability and in terms of the time scale that we're looking at now. Any emergent technology class, let's call it, in terms of the methodologies that you're referring to around the tech-based removals, they're at the beginning of that technology cycle. So oftentimes they've got to basically cover a lot of ground. There's a big hurdle with regards to the technology curve, and so they are much more expensive than nature-based solutions. Not to denigrate technological solutions, because there's a role, and certainly there's appetite in the market, but the scale at which those will be deployed is yet to be determined. And we've got essentially millennia proof of the photosynthetic potential of marine and terrestrial systems, plants essentially sequestering carbon at scale. So it is really important, as you said. In terms of figures, I've heard that the potential reduction perspective of emissions played by nature-based solutions represents 30% or more of the total potential. So it's a significant quotient, let's say, and one that we cannot afford to ignore. And then you add to it the degradation component. It's not static. It continues to be eroded because of the degradation and pressures placed on the biome. So it's really important that folks like yourself are doing that work.
Yeah, I agree with you that I'm not particularly leaning towards nature-based solutions. I think that we should pursue both at the same time.
I think so, both. That's a great point. Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, right now, And I'm just particularly biased because it's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, but you're passionate. It's not
Yes,
bias.
it's my passion.
It's your passion. So that's fantastic. And it comes across, right? Because you talk about not only the impact and the carbon sequestration potential, but also what really drives you, like you said, that's kind of like a nice after thought or a result from that finance going into protecting these systems. But it's the communities that's the key driver for you. And so having that as your North Star, I just want to kind of bring it back to reality, right? Inherently, project development is complex and often fraught with a lot of not only complexities, but challenges. Can you provide some context to folks that are maybe not familiar with the life of a project developer and how you navigate through those challenges on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. So,
and what they are specifically.
So one challenge I can think of is setting expectations with our community. So when we go to our sites, when we conduct a feasibility study, because it's the first step of carbon project development, you build this certain expectations from the community that you're doing a project there, that you're going to be interacting with them. You ask them questions. So from the get-go, it's you want to manage expectations as early on that this might or might not proceed, right? So it's crucial to relay that information to them. So how we do it as Wovoka is we provide immediate benefits as early as we can. So for example, we provide phones, we provide internet connection. So if in any case the project proceeds or does not proceed, at least we have we provide benefit to the communities there. So that's one.
And can I just point that out, that a lot of folks don't even correlate those impacts of projects and the impact that project developers have on the ground. There's rural electrification, there's providing safe drinking water, you're talking about access to effectively communication, but also having that internet connects those remote communities to the world and opens up a wide array of different benefits, such as, access to finance and banking that are often forgotten, right, in those communities. So, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but it's really important. And sometimes things that are embedded deep in a PDD, a project design document, that folks in the market, we've become accustomed to reading, but folks that are not familiar with carbon credits and carbon markets at the project level kind of glance over that oftentimes.
That's another challenge that we have, explaining all the technicalities of a carbon project to those communities. So these communities are have less access to technology, so it's the first time that they're going to be hearing of the word carbon market, carbon offsetting. So it's a challenge for us to relay that information to them. So at least for us, what we do is, since we speak the native language, we communicate it best to them by speaking Tagalog, which is the native language in the Philippines. So that's one. We emphasize over and over again that this is going to be a long-term project. And what we do also is we have a Facebook group chat. So Facebook is the social media platform that's commonly used by most Filipinos, right? So it's where we try to be transparent with our communities. We provide updates. They can ping us anytime if they have any concerns or any updates also.
That's great. And that's obviously that network effect in terms of what social media can provide. Great. Can I ask you about some of the other challenges, right? Like you've alluded to it and you said project development cycle is long. And sometimes tedious. And that's oftentimes because of the monitoring, reporting, and verification, the MRV component. Can you give us some context around that? And effectively, the end goal is to get that certification event and ultimately issuing carbon credits. But that isn't just granted because you turn up at the door. The standards are very, very stringent with regards to that, what they let through and what they ultimately certify. So can you give me your perspective on how you navigate that process?
So from our experience, it's been quite challenging, like starting a project, finding a community, scoping out those areas to see if they're feasible or not. And in reality, it takes around 1 to 2 years just to do those things.
Just to get the feasibility studies?
Yes.
Yeah, and the prior informed consent.
Yes, and you have to get permits from the government. You have to get community consultations going, right? And from that 2 years, you need another 3 years to do the planting, 2 to 3 years to do the planting itself. And from those 2 to 3 years, you need to wait like maybe 5 years for those trees to actually generate substantial credits. So it really is a very, very long time.
That's really important for multiple reasons. Firstly, thank you for essentially putting that on camera and demonstrating, I guess, the difficulty of that process. But it's also really important from a market's perspective, and if you'll indulge me, I want to provide that, which is that there's this very delayed response. So when we have signals from the buy side that they want high quality nature-based solutions in particular, it's not like there's an elastic response where you flick a switch and automatically the high quality carbon credits are result, right? It's a results-based payment approach. That there's a very wide and long process where you have these error bars. You just outlined, 3, 6, maybe 10 years from start to finish, right? Of the feasibility to ultimately issuing those carbon credits. And because of sequestration, it's essentially backloaded. So you start to see most of the carbon credits in terms of those mangroves, those trees growing and sequestering carbon in the latter, 2/3 of the project's life cycle. And so from a project financing perspective, that delay results really with this kind of dislocation in the market. Right now, as demand has essentially been eroded, many projects are finding it difficult to get financed and to get going. And then if the market comes back and it comes back very, let's say, very quickly, we could have these high volatility swings with regards to prices because supply is just not coming through in a linear response. So that's something that we're conscious of at Valiterra with regards to the work that we do advising clients and working and helping them to execute in the market. And that's why we need more and more project developers to continue to do that good work. So that's just like a little bit of that context. How are you finding though, now bringing it back to reality, that financing side, right?
Yeah. So we faced a bit of difficulty in finding mission-aligned investors who are willing to wait for a payback period of say 7 years, right? So we've been talking to venture capitalists, angel investors, and what I see is I think we're trying to find those individuals with really aligned goals that just do not care about the profits, but actually the environment and the people.
The mission alignment.
Yes, and nature funds. And I think we're also trying to look into retirement accounts for those people who have longer time horizon to invest. Maybe we can tap some of those people. And
that's really interesting. So when you say retirement, are you talking about the retirement of a carbon credit? Or are you talking about retirement of individuals like pensions and retirement?
I think that's one question our CEO can answer, because he got that idea that maybe we need to tap these people with longer time horizons.
I think that's genius, quite frankly. We've been having that discussion with some clients right now as well. Reason why I asked is this duality around the meaning, right? For most people, retirement is retirement when you finish up work, etc. Your career. But in this context, there's huge pools of capital that are effectively sitting there and they're looking for a longer terms in terms of payback. That would make a logical sense to essentially be able to provide this as an asset class that's investable. So, how is that happening at right now? I guess it's early days, right?
Yeah, it's really early days. Our CEO has been talking with individuals who might or might not be interested. I mean, there's no harm in it, like explaining his passion, like looking for those people who are willing, but nothing concrete yet.
I mean, look, I'll make the business case for you. I'll put words in the CEO's mouth. But I know Lee quite well, but there really is there's a dislocation in the market that effectively, like I outlined, the supply is not going to come on in a linear manner. And effectively, as demand starts to ramp up, and we're already seeing early signs of that with the recent SBTI communication around potentially opening it up to environmental attribute certificates, such as carbon credits, to meet science-based targets, and evolution around the integrity components in the market, ICVCM and VCMI. As we start to see those foundational elements in the market, there's a belief that the demand starts to come in very rapidly for a very simple reason, that as the private sector looks to balance out its carbon footprint and impact from a climate perspective, that there's a very significant need for the environmental attribute certificates to play that balance role. Whether you call it carbon neutrality or you deviate from that in terms of the claims, that's really important. And it's hard to decarbonize, especially those hard to abate industries, as the name suggests. So as that demand starts to come in and there's a lack of elasticity on the supply side, we expect to see dislocations in the medium to long term with regards to that. And so particularly in the short term with regards to the price signal. So for investors that are risk on, I think that there's a business case to be made that they should be allocating capital to this asset class.
I see.
Yeah. You've given me and our audience a really great view of the mission and also the challenges that are involved in developing projects and why you're passionate about nature-based solutions. But despite all these challenges, you're continuing your mission because of that passion. But let me ask you this question: like, why do you continue on this journey despite the insurmountable odds?
The short answer is it's fulfilling. I mean, yeah. So coming from a science background, being a researcher, I spent so many years reviewing scientific reports, reviewing journals, collecting all these samples. But for what purpose, right? So how I would like to see it is just like a medical degree student who studies all this, who devoted all their years in studying anatomy, medicine, and then how they contribute to society is by becoming a doctor, by healing people. So I would like to imagine myself as an environmental doctor of some sort. Like I want to cure ecosystems, cure the environment, restore nature, and at the same time helping people, right? That's a big component. So I'm very lucky to have this opportunity to actually do those things. So I'd like to quote our CEO, Lee Pearson. He says that the shovel is in our hands. It can be used to dig a grave or plant a tree. So for those people who are strongly positioned to take bold solutions, I think it's the best time is now. Plant a tree.
Fantastic. I love that. And on such a positive note, I'm wishing you and Lee and the team continued success. It's really important that we see more and more finance going to projects such as those that are in your pipeline, and as well as represented across a wide array of different and amazing project developers. Thank you again, Tin, for being the voice of the project development community. You're the first, but certainly won't be the last. And so thank you. Thank you for also communicating your passion to our audience. It's really fantastic. So I'll drink to that.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay.